In this video, we're going to take a look at how Hearthstone killed its best card. Let's not argue over which card is the best card, and instead talk about all of them. The best card from Hearthstone's early days was Warsong Commander. And to this day, it is still the most famous nerf in Hearthstone history. Talked about all over the web. News of this was everywhere. Every gaming news outlet you can find has an article about this one card in Hearthstone getting nerfed. It was a monumental moment in Hearthstone's history, and there are a few reasons for that. First is that this nerf wasn't really a normal nerf. It's like the equivalent of when Epic Games sued a teenager for cheating in Fortnite. They didn't just ban his account and prevent him from competing. They instead took it the extra mile to make a statement. That's what this nerf was. Whether or not they were like trying to make a statement, it had the same levels of like severity and magnitude. It was like, whoa, we're doing that? Okay. Actually nerfing this card would have been raising its mana cost up a mana, you know? Making it a 4 or a 5 cost card. They could also have nerfed it by reducing the attack the minions it can give charge to could have. So instead of being able to give minions with 3 or less attack charge, make it 2 or less attack. Right? But what they actually did was remove it from existence by making it say, your charge minions have +1 attack. This card got absolutely removed from the video game. It no longer exists. The name of the card is the same. It still occupies the slot on the client, but the version of Warsong Commander that the game knew was gone. Whether the teenager deserved it and whether or not Warsong deserved it is up for you to decide. I personally think one did and one didn't, and I'm not going to tell you which one. Next up, we have Corridor Creeper, a card that comes side by side with a wonderful copy pasta.
We have time for one more question. Is there anybody else? You know, I'm feeling a little red today. There's a very cute guy in the audience with a red shirt. Can we get a microphone? Yeah, you, right there, yes.
Hey Ben, I'm TJ. I love your raps. And I don't have a question, but I do have a riddle. It's a guess the card riddle.
Okay, all
right. It goes like this. In the dungeon, I go deeper. In set reviews, I was a sleeper. When minions die, I get cheaper. Who am I?
Corridor Creeper.
You guessed it right. I'm Corridor Creeper. Thanks, Ben.
This is in reference to the fact that the card was revealed pre-expansion in a late-stage card dump. The way it generally works, simplified, is that they reveal cards slowly over time, starting with cards they think are the most coolest or most exciting, ones that revolve around the set's themes, keywords, archetypes, etc., and eventually just dump out the last 30 or so. Whatever that number is, right? So they give card reveals to certain creators, certain websites, post some of their own one at a time, you know, kind of trickle it out. And then it gets to a point where it's like, okay, there's like a week left before the expansion. And so they just dump whatever's left up on the card library. So that way anyone who wants to can start looking at the full set early and begin reviewing it, doing their set reviews, whatever, planning their decks. And this was a part of that late stage card dump. And this card turned out not to just be the strongest card of the set, but one of the strongest Hearthstone cards ever seen. It was incredibly easy to reduce its cost to 0, and so on like turn 3 you'd play 1 or 2 0 mana 5/5s, which back then and somewhat now is an insanely powerful game-winning thing to do. You'd be able to just make a couple trades in an aggro mirror and permanently win the board with a massive swing turn of playing 2 5/5s. During Trinity Series Season 2, a Hearthstone tournament that happened all the way back in 2017, Team Love You Lots, or LOL, consisting of Zalay, Chalky, and Muzzy, discovered just 2 days before the playoffs started that Corridor Creeper was being slept on. At that time, it was only being played in like around 1,000 decks, right? The Kobolds and Catacombs expansion was fresh. It had like just come out, and everyone was playing, you know, the exciting Q block strategies of the world, right? Not noticing that they printed a 0 mana 5/5 after Team LOL brought it to the tournament, dominating everyone and winning the whole thing, getting a grand prize of $75,000. That 1,000 deck number jumped quickly to more than 60,000 decks.
Firefly, Flame Elemental, Mark the Lotus, Value Trade the Taunt.
We don't get the Creeper down right now. I kind of like getting a Creeper down.
Well,
but
getting a Creeper down.
We're only
is
discounting
it's
it by
not
1.
great, yeah. Well, yeah.
So I
No,
do
it's,
this.
we'd have to double trade into their 5/5 if we wanted that.
Well, if we wanted that, we
That's kind of
trade.
good, right? Firefly, Flame Ellie, Lotus, double trade the 5/5, value trade the 2/2, and play a 5/5. Is that good or no?
What to do?
Then we just have 2 3s, a 5/5, and a 2/2. Is that good? That seems insane.
Yeah, so we missed like 5 face damage.
Yeah, but
It's good.
you're just wrecking them, right? So,
Yeah, Firefly.
fast. Yeah.
Firefly, Flame Ellie, Lotus.
Lotus now.
Full clear, right?
Yeah, you go, yep, that into that, that into that, yep. And now you just play Azir.
Big boy on the left. Werewolf Alpha positioning.
In order to kill our little worm, they took its heart and soul, reducing its attack all the way down from 5 to 2, and as a result, demoting it to the worst status a Hearthstone card can have, an Evolve card. Our next contender for the best Hearthstone card of all time is Barnes, releasing as a 4-mana 3/4 Battle Cry, summon a 1/1 copy of a random minion in your deck. This released with the One Night in Karazhan set, and looks would tell you that this card shouldn't be anything terribly problematic. You know, it's a 4-mana 3/4 that summons a 1/1. It's like a 4-mana Yeti split into 2 bodies, right? That's incredibly tame. However, the 1/1 stats don't matter if the effect on the card you're summoning is strong enough. If you, for instance, pull out a 10-mana minion that has a really powerful effect, you know, balanced around the fact that it's on a 10-mana minion, you are now bringing that effect to the board by spending only 4 mana. So now you're starting to see that, yeah, this could be a problem. And it was. One of the first instances where this became a problem was a 10-mana minion, in fact, Yasiraj, that has an effect balanced around the fact that it is, in fact, a 10-mana minion. And so you're getting a 4-mana version with that effect. The way the combo worked was extremely simple. You played Barnes, it would summon a 1-mana 1/1 that at the end of its turn would summon a 10-mana 10/10. And now, not only have you played a 4-mana 3/4 and a 1/1 and a 10/10, but you have cleared your deck of all minions. So for your Spell Hunter that has cards that benefit from not having minions, you have now enabled those cards, but also you're incentivized in 2 ways to run only those 2 minions, because now Barnes always hits the right minion instead of something else. And so you always have that 2-card combo to get insane stats, and you have then the upside of some of your other cards having an additional benefit when there are no minions in your deck. So this Spell Hunter deck was immediately kind of early on the best usage of Barnes, and it is probably the most like famous version of it. But Barnes got used a lot over its lifetime in Hearthstone. You'd also be able to do things like, you know, Resurrect Priest, where no matter what the minion was, that minion would come back with its original stats. The downside would be that you could accidentally hit Barnes if it wasn't a targeted Resurrect, but that was worth doing because you get to cheat out that big minion early and get it into your res pool early. It also works really well with cards like Gadgetzan Auctioneer, right? Doesn't matter how many stats Gadgetzan Auctioneer has. If it's a 1/1 or a 4/4, it still draws you a card every time you play a spell. So you've now cheated that onto the board for less mana than it actually costs. And then you get to play all your spells, yada yada. We've been here before, win the game because you just played a million spells, because you keep drawing them when you play more, and cards don't cost mana in Hearthstone, and yeah. So Barnes was a very problematic, very good card, always, just like right away. And at its heyday, at its peak, it is one of the strongest Hearthstone cards we've ever seen. And a lot of people thought in either format we would never see a card with a higher stat spike than playing Barnes as early as possible, but we actually did with the next card, Trig of the World Tree, which is a legendary weapon that released as a 4-mana 1 attack 5 durability that read Death Rattle, gain 10 mana crystals. This one, unlike some of the others, like was designed with like a specific kind of thing in mind. It was like one of the cards that, like, you know, people may have been playing and trying to use instead of a 0-mana 5/5, being that it's also from Kobolds and Catacombs. The kind of intended use was, you know, you'd equip this as early as you can, and then you'd bank up this big swing turn or big combo turn 5 turns later, right? If you could swing every turn without having to like whack a huge taunt or something. And then you'd be able to play 10 mana, attack with your weapon, play 10 mana again, which would allow you to do a lot of really powerful things. Druid with 20 mana is an absolute unit. And because at the time there were no other Druid weapons or minions that could summon a weapon, you couldn't like play this on 4 and then immediately kill it and gain 10 mana crystals. So you'd have to like work for it, which as a result honestly made this card really quite bad. It's like on its own should not be on this list. It is not just a standalone amazing cards like the others. However, like I alluded to just previously at the end of the Barnes discussion, this card became a higher statistical outlier than any other card in the history of the Wild format because they printed a 1-mana neutral weapon. And Druid, having years and years of combo support, is able to do just an absurd amount of things. Not even just combo, just in general. If you could play a 4-mana weapon and then immediately ramp to 10 mana, you're gonna win, just like most games that you play. You would still use this in things like you'd do way back in the day. You know, you'd, instead of equipping it, attacking 5 times, and then, you know, playing your Togwaggle to steal your opponent's deck or whatever, attack with your 5th one to gain your mana crystals back as a lien to their deck, their hand, so you have a swap back so they can never take their deck back, right? Doing some kind of combo with Aviana Coon, and like, for some reason you want 10 more mana, I don't know. Instead of doing that, you just play this, and then you'd break it immediately with the 1 mana neutral weapon. It was like bonkers. Like, if you could pull that off, those 2 weapons, early, it was like the most powerful thing we've ever seen in Hearthstone in terms of like your chances of winning the game being affected by. Absolutely insane. And not only did they have a neutral 1 mana weapon, they printed a neutral version of a weapon tutor that came out in this set way later that would draw a weapon from your deck. So it was a 2 mana neutral minion that would always draw either Twig of the World Tree or Spear of Sapience. So not only do you have this busted 2-card combo, but you can tutor them. So Questline Druid, Quest Druid, whatever the other versions of Druid decks were at the time, it really didn't matter. You would put those in your deck, you'd put these weapons in your deck, and you would just absolutely dominate. You would just immediately ramp to 10 while also playing cards that cost the amount of mana you started the turn with, because you only need 1 mana to ramp. You could use the other mana you had that turn first. It was nuts. And there were also Druid cards you could use to discover a copy of a card from your deck, such as Moonlight Guidance. So you could Moonlight Guidance into Twig of the World Tree, which would add a copy to your hand. But then if you also played it that turn, you'd draw the original from your deck. So now you could play Twig of the World Tree, play your other Twig of the World Tree to gain 10 mana crystals, and then play your Spear of Sapience to gain another 10 mana crystals. Not only is that like a really powerful turn, but also you could use cards like Audio Amplifier, or let's be real, you're not using that, Guff, the hero card, to set your maximum amount of mana to 20. So you'd play Twig of the World Tree on turn 4, you'd play Guff on turn 5, and then you'd play Spear of Sapience on turn 6, ramping to like 16 mana. And then like, instead of 10, 16, and also the next turn you have 17. Your opponent, by the way, has 5 and then 6, right? You don't just gain 10 mana that turn, but your cap is now increased. So you gain 10 mana more than your opponent every turn until they catch up. But guess what? They never will, because once they get to 10 mana, you have 20. Twig of the World Tree, it was like legal cheats. Like, it's like, you know, oh, you have 5 mana? I'll take 15. And like, you alter the game files. But like, it's just a card you can play. You can just do whatever you want. It didn't matter what you were trying to do to actually win the game. You just did it. You just won. To kill this best card candidate, Blizzard nerfed the card to restore it to its original design function. Instead of Death Rattle, gain 10 mana crystals, they changed it to Death Rattle, refresh your mana crystals. So you could still use it in the way it was intended, to play cards, refresh it, play more cards. And it actually still works like with Guff in a little bit more powerful way, where you could refresh 20 mana crystals, but it hasn't seen any play since it was nerfed. Next up, we have Patches the Pirate.
I'm in charge now.
Another fabulous consideration for the best Hearthstone card of all time. Patches releasing as a 1 mana, 1 attack, 1 health minion charge. After you play a pirate, summon this minion from your deck. This card, to most people, they don't see right away just how good it is, and they don't realize all the ways that it is good. This card allows you free tempo, free value, free face damage. It's like a free mage ping, right? That doesn't cost you any mana, or more importantly, any cards from your hand. It doesn't reduce your hand size by 1 in order to put this card in play. So you're getting immediate tempo that can attack immediately, and you're not paying any mana or any card for it, right? One of the big drawbacks of a card like Wisp isn't obviously the mana, because you don't pay any mana for it. Wisp with charge would still be like an card, because while it is free and it's a 1 with a charge, just like Patches here, it doesn't pull out of your deck for free, so it would remove a card from your hand. It would cost you the resource of a card in your hand, which is limited. So Patches immediately off rip started terrorizing the Gadget Sand meta by just being an absolute powerhouse in all aggro decks. You would play it with a whole slew of pirates to synergize with anything related to pirates, such as, you know, South Sea Captain or the Cannon. And you'd put in, you know, class spells and class minions to kind of create an all-around aggro deck that would cheat out a lot of stats, either buff the stats or finish with burn spells, etc. But it didn't take long before every deck that could, even control decks, would run a 3 to 5 card pirate package in order to utilize pulling packages from its deck as a 2/2 with that South Sea Captain. And it's just all around extremely powerful. It's just really, really good. And obviously you want to do it early, so you run 1 mana pirates or cheap pirates. So to turn it back a notch without fully removing it, because it is kind of like the new hot pirate from the Gadgetzan expansion. They removed charge from the minion. Patches, the pirate is no longer in charge. And while this did in fact cut off its legs a little, of the good cards that have gotten nerfed over history, this card I think has held up better than any of them. It just doesn't need charge. It still does all of the things it's good at without the charge. It's just slightly less good. Patches is probably one of the best Hearthstone cards ever, if not the best. But again, we're not going to argue about that. That is how they dealt with one of the best Hearthstone cards ever in Patches the Pirate. Next up for consideration, we have Kael'thas Sunstrider. This card, in terms of like enabling the most egregious things, might be the winner of this list, as it's one of the few cards in Hearthstone history that have enabled a turn 1 OTK, a turn 1 kill. This card was most popular in Standard, I think, in just general, you know, Kael'thas mage decks, where you'd have Kael'thas and you'd have Sorcerer's Apprentice, and you just play a bunch of cheap spells and then play a big spell for free, rinse and repeat with things like, you know, Pyroblast if you dared, or just like whatever big spell that you had at the time. In terms of other more combo decks, in the turn 1 deck, however, it was played in Druid with actually our old friend Barnes. Barnes would pull out Kael'thas, and then you'd play all your spells, making it so that your ultimate infestations were 0 alongside of your lightning blooms, your biology projects, your innervates. It was kind of just Druid's ultimate dream card, because you could use bio project, like I said, lightning blooms, innervates, moonfires, whatever, as your 0 mana spells to activate Kael'thas's effect, which would then make your ultimate infestations 0, so that you would draw your whole deck and keep going, while also dealing damage face. It was that simple. You would ramp to be able to play Barnes. You'd ramp a little bit more if you needed to, just to be able to play like some 1 or 2 cost spells to make your 3rd spell free. You'd play 0 mana Ultimate Infestation, 0 mana Starfire, 0 mana Nourish, whatever it was, so you could keep the chain going, and you won the game. It's literally that egregious. You just win on turn 1. It cheated out so much mana, even in the most tame scenarios where you'd play like a couple arcane missiles with it. Even in that scenario, you're cheating on mana, and you're really tame. So this card, definitely one of the strongest Hearthstone cards of all time, and it had to get nerfed, essentially killing the card. You know, anytime you have a nerf like this, which is advocated a lot in the community, you've killed the card. Instead of reducing the 3rd spell to 0, it now reduces the 3rd spell to 1. This is very similar to nerfs that receive the words not less than 1. You know, Sorcerer's Apprentice, for example, got the not less than 1 added to it. The card is now unusable. It is dead. It does not exist anymore, because 1 is infinitely more than 0. You can't use it. It's just impossible. So when you do a nerf a card like that, the cards might as well just not exist anymore. But that is how they killed Kael'thas, one of Hearthstone's best cards. Another thing worth pointing out about Kael'thas Sunstrider, we had already seen it broke the game, we had already seen it enable turn 1 OTKs, but once it rotated to Wild, they took the risk and they unnerfed the card. So 2 years ago, we get to re-experience Kael'thas, and at that point, the levels of consistency in which you would win in the first like 3 turns just out of hand was so much higher. It was extremely gross. The meta in Wild at the time, after it had rotated, devolved into that deck, which would just insta-win, and a priest deck with Switcheroo, Darkness, and Boar that would sometimes insta-win. And it was just like, do nothing until you win, and whoever won first in the first like 3 turns was the winner. Every other deck just didn't stand a chance. It was really funny. There was a nerf making it cost 7 instead of 6 that we kind of glossed over, but it really did not matter. I'm all for them taking the risks and unnerfing cards, and I'm pleased that like within a week or 2 after reverting it, they nerfed it again. But it was an absolute comical time in Hearthstone to see one of the best cards go from being killed to being reverted to then being still extremely good and having to be killed. The card I'm talking about next is Kingsbane, a 1 mana rogue weapon that says always keep enchantments. Death Rattle, shuffle this into your deck. So what that means is if you play this 1 mana 1/3 weapon and you play Deadly Poison on it, it is now a 3/3 weapon. When that weapon dies and goes back into your deck, it will still be a 3/3 weapon that costs 1. So you have an unlimited amount of attacks with this weapon so long as you can consistently draw and replay it. Probably not truly in the consideration for the best Hearthstone card of all time, but in a 2-card combo was an absolute terrorizer of both formats and did just an absolutely egregiously disgusting powerful thing. The particular point in its absolute heyday, when it was absolute strongest, was the moment just before the card Leeching Poison ended up getting nerfed. I won't spoil yet how it got nerfed, but essentially, Kingsbane is at its strongest the more good enchantment spells and cards it has available to it, and Leeching Poison at the time was one of the better enchantments that you could possibly have. A Leeching Poison, a card released, is a 2-mana spell that said, give your weapon lifesteal. Normally, a very tame card. You get 1, 2, maybe 3 swings of a weapon with lifesteal for the cost of 2 mana. Fairly good, but it runs out. But with Kingsbane, it doesn't run out. You now have a 8, 9, 10, or 11 attack weapon, whatever it was, with lifesteal forever. So not only are you dealing that amount of damage every turn, but you're healing it too. Try winning a game when your opponent has an 11 attack weapon with lifesteal with unlimited durability. You don't. You can't beat a 22 health swing every turn. It was absolutely insane. You had to kill them before they could get a big enough Kingsbane, or it was just over. They achieved like raid boss levels of power, and it was absolutely comical that like that 2 simple card combo was allowed to exist as long as it did, as a strong enough place that it was at. It was absolutely crazy. We've talked about Kingsbane a lot before. It's a fairly samey strategy, like every iteration, right? You're just like drawing Kingsbane with cards that tutor weapons, and you're running draw cards and weapon buffs. It's like fairly straightforward. You have a little bit of interaction with the minions maybe to not die. Things like Blade Flurry will help you do that, but for the most part, you're just trying to survive while you build a big weapon. It could kill your opponent with that big weapon. And what better way to do that than healing for the amount of damage you deal every turn? So, Kingsbane on its own, outside of the Leeching Poison era, probably not the greatest card of all time, but one of the best cards of all time. And this point, like its peak, was certainly one of the strongest things you could do in Hearthstone ever. So I think it deserved to get talked about. Absolutely super stoked that does not exist anymore. Although technically we're breaking our streak here because they didn't actually kill Kingsbane. Kingsbane was unchanged, but what they did to Leeching Poison was they made it, instead of a 2-mana spell, they made it a 1-mana spell. So hey, progress. But then instead of give your weapon lifesteal, they made it give your weapon lifesteal this turn. So you now have 2 total swings of massive lifesteal for the cost of 2 cards instead of unlimited for the cost of 1 card.
And that is how they killed one of the greatest 2-card combos in Hearthstone history, where we were able to achieve ultimate raid boss status. Before I end the video, my wife wanted to do an outro, so here she goes.
Bye everyone, this has been... Bye everyone, this has been... Bye everyone, this has been Jordan MG. Come back again next time, and we'll have lots of fun. Okay, bye.
Oh my goodness.